Hello, you're free to one way or another. You're with Neill Smith, and I've got a treat for you today. I've started a new segment. Hopefully we'll do it more than once. Let's see if I piss him off. But this is my old ethics and philosophy teacher, Mr. Dave Moorhead. I'll try and refrain from calling you sir because I'm 37 now. But he's kindly agreed to at least do this one and see what happens in the future. The struggle of educating Neill, because it wasn't easy, was it?
No, I'm still in therapy, but I'm boldly trying to deal with my ghosts and have a chat with Neill again.
Yeah. My mother went to the parents' evening once, and she said, "Who's Mr. Moorhead?" And I went, "Why?" She went, "I asked him what you were like in class, and he said bubbly." She still talks about that to this day. So obviously I wasn't great. But that being said, I've chosen a topic, obviously, with it being ethics and philosophy, and religious education, what you taught. I sort of racked my brains what's going on in the world today, and obviously I wanted to keep it quite serious. This is a bit different from some of the other videos we do, like reactions and podcasts talking about whatever's in the papers and trending. We chose the pro-life v pro-choice arguments, and especially in the States at the minute, the right and the left seem to be doing a lot of protests and arguing, and it seems a big sticking point. And I know in the run-up to this, you mentioned in the Bush campaign, it was pretty much won and lost on the argument itself. So with that being said, I do want to make a quick disclaimer, and I think it's important that I do. Obviously, we're two males here talking about a subject that largely affects females. If anybody, obviously, thinks that we've missed anything, we're simply expressing our opinions. And like I say, it's called the struggle of educating Neill, so we are learning as we're doing. So anything we do say is opinion or based on information that we've seen or heard at this point. So I understand, obviously, with the subject, people might comment and, get offended or whatnot. It's not meant in that way. And obviously, in terms of not having a woman here, it would just be me and David when we do this podcast, no matter what the subject matter be. So that being said, I would also counter the baby's not represented in it either. So just allow us to do what we can with the information that's in front of us and just take it as it is. It's not meant for any sort of agenda pushing. I don't really sit on either side of the fence now, and I think we'll try and draw a conclusion at the end on, whether it's changed our opinion or whether, it's still unclear and there still needs to be something else done about it. But yeah, moving into the actual main body of the subject, I don't know. I mean, obviously, where you teach, what would be your starting point? Because I got lost in the actual sort of existential side of it in terms of what is life, what constitutes life. Would that be your starting point when you take a class?
I think, yes, I think so. I think the philosophical concept is, when does the life in the womb, because we all agree it's human life, right? When does the human life get the same rights as you and I? Because if we were murdered now, it would be a crime. So when does the embryo fetus, when is that granted the same equality under the law?
Yeah.
And then you would have to look at the different reasons. I mean, some people say it's conception because the egg is fertilized by the sperm, and from then on, nothing else is needed. It's a total 9 months development. The Methodist Church said actually it was individuality. That's what makes us human. So they did 14 days because after 14 days, you don't have the separation for twins. Then you've got, is it the heartbeat at 8 weeks? It's fully formed at 12. But the British law is that at 24 weeks, it's viable, it can live outside the womb, and that's what gets its rights under the law. However, we've still got, even if you think about when you grant the life in the womb human rights, you've still got the added ethical dilemma that when can you actually kill a life? Because British law allows termination abortion up to 38 weeks under certain circumstances.
Is that specifically for health issues related to the mother?
It's got to be, or the child. It's got to be abnormal and grave. So some people have said, oh, cleft palate has been used, right? But actually, I think there's only one clinic in the country that does late abortions, and the embryo or the fetus is actually killed, and then they have to give birth. I would say that abortion is horrific for most women. It's not something they choose. It's not something they want. It may be the lesser of two evils. So it's not a celebration. It's if only life were different. If I had a different situation, I would have this child. But currently, there are outside factors, lack of support, financially, emotionally, etc., that may cause them to do this. So I think we have to bear in mind not only the action, but the situation it's in.
I do know, I wanted to touch on the main existential side of it before we moved on to that, but I will say, I do agree with you with that. And the problem I found was looking into the studies. I mean, obviously we'll touch on it later, but they give a study, which I actually sent you the other day, and it gives reasons for, and people chose multiple reasons why they would choose to have an abortion. And it was a wide sort of polar extreme of from health risks to getting educated or whatnot. It doesn't give any differentiation between whether someone put I have health risks and education. So pinning it down to, you know, this person had one specific reason. It's easy to take those statistics and make an argument based on, well, 30% just felt like this. So I do feel some of the studies out there don't give a great sort of picture of each individual person's life. But that being said, I was surprised when I saw in 2019, when I was looking at the figures, there were 209,000 abortions. So any research done, I mean, depending on the sample size of the study, it would be hard to break down each person's you know, given situation. But what I feel like that leads to, when it goes to the political side of it, it's easy to use those statistics to suit your arguments. And I was very dubious sort of forming an opinion when I was doing my research, because my first thing was to say, it's just not time yet. That's not a good enough reason if we decide that it is life. But then again, the study said people can choose multiple reasons, and it wasn't differentiated whether one person chose that and said other. So I feel like the situation itself has to really be treated on that specific person. It can't be taken from a study necessarily, unless, you know, they put an immense amount of money and time and effort into it to take a more detailed sort of approach as to, you know, and some people don't like disclosing information as to what their reasons are.
No, I would totally agree with that. I think before women are given an abortion, they do have counselling. They do have personal, private, confidential time to discuss their reasons. But the reason itself, put down on a piece of paper, they may not wish that to be that public. So they may give a two-word answer.
Yeah,
but that's because
public, isn't it?
It's not there. Sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Go on. I was just saying that they may not wish their whole life to be out there. I mean, if you are a teenager pregnant through incest, what do you put on the form? You know, and you might write back pain because it's just blocking the access. I don't. I'm not sure if that's that clear, but I just feel that
No, I
sometimes
understand.
people want they want privacy for their health choices, and that's a difficulty that we, as you quite rightly say, we look at these and people go, oh, back pain, that's not a good reason to kill a child. But I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and you know myself from previous. I mean, when I was younger, obviously, I had an 18-year-old mentality. The world was black and white. And as you get older, obviously, there's a multitude of grey areas that become apparent. And I think I see it in the broad spectrum of politics nowadays. And I think probably when I was 17 or 18, I could have chose the right or the left either way, just because they suited my opinion at that time. Now I feel like people, you know, they look at these arguments. I mean, I'm using the right and the left as an example because, especially in the States, they do butt heads on this specific subject. I feel like people support one or the other like it's a football team. Like, I support Everton, I hate Liverpool. So whatever these do is the opposite of that. And I feel like sometimes you have to keep that in mind, especially when you see some of these protests and people are shouting and screaming at each other. You know, they put a lot of stuff up on social media, which basically, you know, is always weighted. You see a lot of people, they've got an 18-year-old girl in the crowd who makes an argument really badly, and they destroy her in debate, and they end up going off in a strop. And then they put it up as if to say, these people don't know what they talk about. I do. And I feel like this subject is absolutely saturated with that, because on doing research, I really found two people who were capable on the same level of debate. And I feel like it gets clouded, the message, for people who actually are considering abortion and considering their future and what they're going to do, because of a lot of the information that's out there. And that was one of the reasons why I chose this, because there were a couple of different subjects I wanted, but I just felt like if I was a 16-year-old girl, say, and I was looking online and I watched one set of videos, I'm going to hell. If I looked at another set of videos, I'm perfectly fine to do it. Some videos describe the baby as a parasite, and I felt like, you know, there's not a good, consistent, well thought out set of rules there. And a lot of the NHS sites, you know, they're very informational, they're very direct. And if I was a 16-year-old girl who's maybe not that well educated and saw all the numbers and figures, and it might be overwhelming when making a decision. Did you follow what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, I do. I mean, the trouble is, so many of the arguments are emotive. They're deliberately made to pull us one way or the other, as if we're at a pantomime and we boo one argument and cheer another. And because they simplify it, they don't understand the whole argument, and that's the problem. That I think you're quite right, that people take it like a football team, and it's either abortion's right, abortion's wrong. I personally feel that it's when we're being told by the right, especially in America, that killing a child in the womb is wrong. But once that child is born, it can be abandoned by the state, it can be raised in poverty. If it's from a foreign country, it can be killed in war. So there doesn't seem to be any consistency, and the right seems to say that the life in the womb is more important. But surely, if we're pro-life, then it's life whether we're 3 months in the womb or 99 years old. And I really do think that, I always feel that if you're going to tell someone that they couldn't have an abortion and it's wrong, they should take the child and raise the child. Because you're prescribing a life. You're saying it's wrong, you've got to have this child, it would be murder. Well, if for many, many reasons women can't actually raise their child, if you truly are against abortion, you should open your home and take the child. And if you don't want to, perhaps it is just a football game.
Yeah, I mean, they tend to counter that from what I've seen with the adoption. But what I'll touch on then, because we've touched on
Just say, sorry, with the adoption, right, not enough people are coming forward. It's okay to say, oh, that child will be adopted, but there are thousands and thousands of children in care in this country, and people aren't coming forward. And once you get to 5...
The state of the care system to some degree. I'm not saying the care workers don't do their job or whatnot, but there is a lack of funding to some degree. I mean, my mother was a social worker, and some of the stories she used to tell me of, I mean, she used to go out on Christmas Day to deliver presents to children because she knew if they delivered them on Christmas Eve, they would have been sold for drugs by Christmas morning. And they weren't even in foster homes, but they were kids the state just didn't deem it wise enough to take from the parents yet. So again, in terms of the greater good of what's the best, I mean, I don't feel like I'm necessarily qualified to say, you know, 3 months in the room or live to 99. I mean, people can always overcome adversity. I think we'll probably touch on that in the conclusion. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. The system that we have in place isn't funded well enough to cope with the problem at hand. And when they look at crime, you know, you would think that dealing with that would be one way to stem a lot of the issues that we have on the street. I mean, you only have to look at the epidemic of stabbings that we have at the moment. You know, it's getting a bit out of hand. But I
was going to say, when was it Saudi Arabia, when they killed the journalist and took him into the embassy and butchered him? I think President Trump said it was absolutely appalling, but we make billions selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, so we can't do anything. So you've got an industry, a multi-billion industry selling weapons of death that kill people. And then in the same, you've got a country, America, saying that killing in the womb is wrong, but killing outside the womb is not. And it just seems to be that if abortion had more economic, if having children had more economic strength, that might change it. I don't know if I've made that clear or not.
Yeah, no, I see the point. It's not one I've considered, you know, in terms of the country's monetising abortion and, you know, that becoming a bit more of a...
I think the point is that they've become ethical and moral in areas that do not hurt their financial purse.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
And actually, true morality should affect your economic status and how you act.
Yeah, and I think most countries, not just the States, fall under that same brush, you know,
yes.
So by that same brush, to be honest with you. I mean, there are certain things that the UK do that you can't really say you're very proud of. I mean, we could go through about 20 different subjects on that matter. In terms of Trump and the right and their moral standpoint that, you know, obviously abortion's wrong. I mean, their argument is strictly, you know, one that you would sort of push towards the Catholic Church or, you know, the church's standpoint of it's still life in the womb and does it have human rights? And, you know, I got really sort of wound up with, well, in the room, you know, what is it, what's happening? I looked at, you know, basic definitions of life. I even got a quote from Schrödinger: living things avoid decay into disorder and equilibrium. You know, I tried to be as thorough as possible. I looked at what's the difference between us and a bunch of cells. And I mean, in a broad sense of it, you know, the breakdown of the cells is they have a cell wall separating themselves from the outside influences. They maintain a constant state, they grow, they eat, they react to the environment, they're subject to evolution, and it makes more of itself, it multiplies. The thing that we say, the difference between us and a cell is that a cell itself wouldn't be considered to be alive due to the majority of its reactions being imposed on it and influenced by its outside environment. In terms of its ability to you know, sort of work, and, you know, the amount of things, sorry, I might have worded that wrong. It has like several million reactions going off on any 1 second. So there are things going on at that level. It's obviously its own little entity given on. And again, I read Horton Hears a Who every night. I'm a 2-year-old. He was only 2 yesterday. And a life is a life, no matter how small, where it's got the people living on the little dandelion. And it was only when I started doing this, I was sort of like, is this meant to be some sort of, is Dr. Zeus making some sort of statements about pro-life, pro-choice? A life is a life, no matter how small. So, you know.
But then that could also be an argument against war.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this idea of, what's it called when you just get the civilians? Collateral damage.
Collateral damage, yeah. Well,
you know,
yeah,
the idea that we can bomb other countries and kill other children, but you can't kill your own.
Yeah, and again, I had an argument with someone the other day on the Israel-Palestine thing, and my point of view is they just need to stop killing each other. And I know that's a very broad spectrum, but their whole thing was one side is right, the other side's wrong. And I mean, it's irrelevant of who's right and wrong. There needs to be some peace talks, because right now there's a lot of innocent people. Oh, well, there'll never be peace in the region. It's all just collateral damage. And I feel like that while you have that view, that's all very well and good. You can point the finger and blame someone and get really angry. But the fact of the matter is, if that was the UK and Wales, sorry, England and Wales, I wouldn't care who's right and wrong. I'd be worried about my kids. And, you know, we're moving on to a different subject here, but I do feel like, again, where you mentioned collateral damage, and I feel like sometimes there's an argument for everything, and you can move it away from the subject and, you know, point fingers and whatnot. This specifically for me, I want to get to the nub of when is life and what is life, and that will decide this whole argument for me, I think.
Well, I think
that trumps all the other arguments.
Yeah, the utilitarians, Jeremy Bentham, do you remember him?
Yeah, I do. I couldn't be right. Back to you.
They came up with the idea of sentient beings, that in the end, it's about whether we feel pleasure or pain, and that's what makes our humanity. So they would say the life in the womb, when it's a sentient being, when it can feel pleasure and pain, then it's got human rights. So you could say after the first trimester, it can feel pleasure and pain. So it's a human being. Immanuel Kant would say you have to be a rational creature, right? That's what human beings think. That's what makes us different. So when the brain develops at 8 weeks and starts sending messages.
Well,
so I suppose it's your definition
with that.
Of what?
Sorry, I was going to say at 10 days. Sorry, I'm looking through notes because I tried to learn a lot in a few days. So cells are grouped together into support structures and can direct its own development with no input from the mother's tissues at 10 days. Would not be considered ability to reason, even though it's at a very, very minute level?
I think it would probably be the potential.
The potential.
It's like how many swallows make a summer. That if you heard that phrase,
No,
you know, when it does it, it's like how many murders make a genocide. It's that moment of when is it actually a rational creature, so that it's got potential and it's beginning, but it's the labels.
Well,
you know?
Yeah, and again, the other argument that I'd seen, well, it wasn't an argument, sorry, it was nothing to do with pro-life. This was literally on looking at what constitutes life, because another theory was DNA is the passing on of information, and that is effectively what we do when we pass on to our children. We're passing on our DNA, and that is effectively our way of living forever. And an interesting point that I saw was, again, at the cellular level, mitochondria, which I didn't realise used to actually be bacteria, that moved into cells and died off because mitochondria is dead, just to pass on its DNA to the cell so that the DNA can live on. So effectively, in that sort of informational sense, and again, it works with the people would say there's the potential for artificial intelligence, which, while it won't be living tissue as such, that is just a system of information. So would the information being passed on at that point of the sperm meeting the egg, would that not be considered as the passing on as life and existence? You passed on that information. And I feel that that argument is a bit thin, but it's there. And I wondered what your thoughts was on that, because effectively that having a child is you're passing on your information to then effectively your essence is living forever.
Yeah, I personally think it's not about when the life in the womb becomes a human being. I think it's always, as I've grown older now, it's about the situation it's going to be born into. So I have stopped debating the whole, is it 12 weeks, is it conception, etc., because each child needs so much support when they're born.
What about then?
Some people might say I have a bit of a coward there because I haven't made a decision. But I really feel
I appreciate
every child needs so much.
You know, that's the thing though. That's the whole point of debate. Because for me, and I'm a new father. I've got a 4-year-old. I've got a 2-year-old, and I wasn't going to say, but for me, one of the big things when I was looking at this, having had an experience of miscarriage before, I know that you mourn miscarriage, and this was before the 12-week block. So for me, it was like, how can you mourn something that you don't consider to be a life? But again, you're looking at it from a completely different angle. I know you've got kids as well. You're looking at it from, you know, what's the greater good? Going in and having a life of pain, something that, I mean, we all watch Unreported World and stuff like that, where you see these people running. I remember watching the one, it was like 6 o'clock on a Friday night, and it was about the Tamils being pretty much wiped out in Sri Lanka, and it wasn't reported. And Unreported World did a quite brutally honest, and there was a guy holding a child of like 4, which is about the same age as my oldest, with the top half of her head missing. And they even gave a disclaimer saying, look, this is brutal, but it is not being reported by mainstream media. We are showing this to show you what is happening. At one point, they bombed the beach, where they said, anybody who wants to go there, it's a Red Cross area, it won't be harmed. And then they bombed the beach. And you look at that, and you know, even though I'm thinking of from the existential point of view, is that you know, is that a better situation from you know, being nipped in the bud?
Yeah, I was going to just go back to the miscarriage and my children. I have our first child would have been 31 this year.
Oof.
But at 12 weeks my wife miscarried, and for us, we still mourn that child.
Yeah,
we still do 31 years later. So from the moment that child was conceived, and only lived for 12 weeks, to us, that was a human being. It was a person we loved, and it's a person we miss. But
is that because
I also
because
realize
of this for us though? Because obviously we've had a similar experience. Is that our situation that we've wanted that child and it was going to go into a good, that we then in our head built a person? Or is it because that scientific feeling through connection?
No, I think it is because we wanted the child, and the situations were right, and we were welcoming the child, and it's that emotional pain. You know, I've also
I was conflicted on that, because even though you can look at it from an outside point, you don't want to believe that it's not a life. Or I'm still not saying it's not. I'm still not saying it's not, because there's still a big part of me that feels like it was. But you have to try, and when you tackle this subject, you're dealing with other people's ability to have the right of abortion. You have to try and look at it as objectively as possible, which is why I'm saying, obviously, you know, that's a feeling that you feel. it's hard to look at it as something else, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And also I feel that Tay-Sachs is a genetic disorder where by the time the child's 4, they're blind, they're deaf, you know, they're paralyzed and they die. It's horrific, horrific. Now you need to remove that really from the gene pool. It's very strong in Hasidic Jews because the gene pool is small. So you would wonder, would you bring a child into the world with Tay-Sachs? You know, which for many, it wasn't a reality for me, right? But it will be a reality for some couples when they have to face that. So I think that's another thing as well. If you know your child is going to be suffer, should you allow the life to continue?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's hard to say because I don't feel like this. You know, it's your choice at the end of the day. You do have counselling, etc. So there's no system in place, is what I'm going to say. I feel like in certain situations, you know, it's not so much that it's a no-brainer, but you do have a strong feeling that you know that it is your choice. You know, because some people may say, irrelevant of what my child's going to have in terms of adversity, it's a child nonetheless, and that's going to be their feeling for it, and they may want to bring it into the world. I know when we were pregnant, they did this in England, but not when we were in Spain, because obviously we had the second child in Gran Canaria. He's a little Canarian. And even better, do you want to have a laugh? So we named our first child Kagan after the Highlander. I think I told you this. Obviously, when we had the second child, we couldn't call him Dave or Tom because it'd be Kagan and Dave. You know, it just wouldn't go. And we like the name Conan because he's born in Gran Canaria. He's Conan the Canarian. So I knew that would make you smile. But the one thing they did ask us, well, do you want to know if there's a possibility of Down syndrome? They didn't ask us about cleft palate, or I don't know if it was just that they didn't, you know, they checked and it wasn't there and they didn't think. And obviously there's no issue with Down syndrome there, but it gives you that, you know, they know and they're asking you, and you sort of like, they're asking me because there's still time for a possibility to abort. And in that moment, you've not built, especially with the first child. With the second child, it was expected, but they never asked. But unless there was just a language barrier there, because my Spanish is so-so. But it's that sort of being confronted with it, and your natural instinct is to say it doesn't matter, but you still ask to know because you have to prepare. And for me, I was just of the opinion, I mean, we know a lovely family whose child, they're always here on the island, he's got Down syndrome and he does the karaoke and that. He's a lovely fella, and to me he's just as normal as any other person. So the problem is, in that situation, I would assume you're choosing whether you're able to cope with the extra sort of issues, the extra stresses that come along with having to deal with someone who's going to need a little bit more care than say the normal person will flee the home at 18 and, you know, go and do different things by themselves. And you can effectively say, you know, they're going to need support here and there, but I'm not going to hear about it 24/7. And someone with Down syndrome needs that extra care in place. And for me, it wasn't so much the worry of having to give that care. It was the worry of, will I make it to 50 years old? What's going to happen at that point? You know, you're going to be on your deathbed about who's going to get that care in your absence.
Yeah, but I would also say that the state needs to step up. The state needs to use more of its resources and money to provide support for children with special needs. And in the UK, it doesn't. It's way down. There's a big court case coming at the moment. But if there was more support for children with Downs, then it wouldn't fall onto the parents.
Well,
and I think that's another ethical decision. I mean, there's the African proverb, isn't there? It takes a whole village to raise a child, right? And perhaps we continuously force the idea that you raise your children, which you should because you're the primary carers, but the state should as well. The state isn't there just to make money and have an economy.
well, the state does, if your child doesn't have problems either, because I know for a fact, before we left for Spain, we were looking at the childcare situation, and they only gave out the 3 hours for babysitting for you to both go back to work between the age of 3 and 4. I don't know if that's changed now, but that's 1 year that you have to take out. And if you're in a problem, you know, it's not so much of a problem for us, but if you're in a problem where you were only earning X amount, and then you had to add, say, £200 a week of your earnings to go get the child put into nursery or whatnot, you know, you're effectively in those years stuck one of you taking time out. And if you're a single parent, you know, the benefits don't really support in a way that effectively helps you out. You're living on the breadline unless you're in a job that effectively is paying above the national average. So irrelevant of whether your child has those issues like Down syndrome or whether your child's fully healthy and fit, I think the first 5 years of childcare, and especially if you're a single parent, is extremely tough and you're living on the breadline. And if you've not got that family support network around you, then it is a consideration that you do have to make, which is why before when I said looking at the statistics, well, we haven't financially planned for it. It seems to me, well, if you've addressed the existential part of it and said it is a life, then you then have to consider the part which is you're saying, what's its life going to be like? And is the breadline, being on the breadline for 5 years, is that enough to say, well, we'll overcome the adversity and then we're going to have a great life on from that point? When they're in school, I can go back and do what I want. You know, the first 5 years are going to be tough. It's going to be adversity. A study, and these politicians who are making decisions for us, does that study really encompass the full picture painted? And like you say, did they step up enough to help?
Yeah, I think in a culture where the government just is there to make money and that there is no real strong support to develop and embrace what parenthood is. I mean, you know, there should be so many clubs and support groups and help out there so that children, by the time they're 5, are balanced and strong and healthy, and then they can go to school. Otherwise, we've just got this culture where the rich can afford children and the poor can't. And that seems to be, especially the healthcare in America, it must be saying that all the time. Unless, of course, more children is more money because they have to take out insurance.
I looked at the fact that when this COVID situation happened, and especially in Spain, on an island that demands tourism, what happens in the UK directly affects us. I mean, I'm still on furlough for my work, doing contracts in a hotelier company. Because there's no one here, I'm still on furlough. And what happens in England directly affects us, irrelevant to whether we're in the country or not. And I noticed when they spent a couple billion on a track and trace program that was already in place in Apple and Google or whatnot, they could have already just used the one that was in place to do the track and trace, but they insisted on paying people that were friends of friends to put their own track and trace in place and spent a couple billion on it. I mean, that couple billion could have easily been put into the system that we're talking about in order to help support families in
absolutely
first few crucial years that are really the thing that people who are going out and getting abortions, that's a big consideration for them, you know. And there's,
I think women would say, if life were different, if the picture was different, if I had more support, then I could. I think let's say 7 billion wasted on the track and trace is just appalling. That could have really, really impacted and helped women and children.
He could have done a number of things. I mean, it took a young footballer in Marcus Rashford to sort out the school dinners. There could have been, I mean, 37 billion. You tell me that, you know, you can't sort out, you can sort that out just on a whim when this just turns up out of the blue. You're saying that they had 37 billion just set aside just in case a pandemic happened, just in case they need a track and trace system. That was just pulled out of the back pocket. Like, they had that money spare, but yet they can't do other things within the budget. And I felt like the whole pandemic seems to have really encompassed on, we've had money sat round that they've told us is on a budget. They can't increase nurses' wages. They can't do this. They can't put a support system in place for young families. They can't give more hours to nurseries paid by the government to help families out who aren't in the top bracket of earnings. And while we feel like maybe we've gone off track, not really, because maybe a lot of abortions wouldn't happen if people felt like the support was there. And I think the government is, where I talk about at a cellular level, what impacts a cell are the outside influences. Well, that's still happening on a level of the government's impact on what we are. We pay so much in taxes. I mean, I'll give you an example of this. So there's no council tax in Gran Canaria. You pay about 2% tax at first up until a certain level, and businesses are impacted a lot more. They pay bigger fees. If you're self-employed and you earn a couple of grand a year, it doesn't matter, you're paying £300 a month to be a self-employed person minimum, and then it goes up and up and up. So the businesses are really pushed at paying out. And you may say it takes big business away, but it doesn't. They're still there, all the same companies, they're all there. And there are a lot more people who go out and do their own businesses. If you're contracted to work and you get to 6 months, they have to pay you out a large proportion following that 6 months. They have to put you on something called an indefinite contract. So, you know, they are really pushed to pay the people for, and I got, for paternity, they offered me up to like 6 months to be off. I didn't take it because I wanted to get back to work, but I could have been off for up to 6 months, and the company are forced to make me take it. So it's family orientated. I mean, I couldn't believe the difference in the hospital alone.
Yeah, and I think that's it. If you are really pro-life, right, and you want to reduce abortions, create a culture that welcomes and cherishes children and gives mothers support. Then people will choose less abortions because the picture is different.
Well, the Spanish encompass, no matter what happens, every Sunday is family day. So I'll walk down the road and they'll all be sat in the garden playing guitars, singing together, dancing, having fun. And I was like, you might have a roast dinner on a Sunday, but then it's off to the pub to watch Super Sunday. You know, it's a different culture. And what you're saying there is, it's a nice thing to embrace, but it's hard to shake what you've spent 30 odd years of your life doing. And it's really sort of something that we accept in the UK as this is the way it is, and it's just a harsh reality, but with a British stiff upper lip. But when you look at it, I do feel like, I put it this way, when I was 18 years old, I'd say, no, it's a life, that's it. But the more you think about what people go through, especially in the UK, on a day-to-day basis, and listening to stuff that my mum told me from when she was at social work and stuff like that, I do feel like it is a more, like I said before, a grey area, and it's not as simple as what the right and the left make out. I
did want to say two things. One, that sometimes abortion is presented as a remedy, like a little operation that will sort everything out. A friend of mine, when she was in her teens, had an abortion and has never conceived again, and is now nearly in her 50s. So it is a very, very difficult decision, because that may be your only one chance pregnancy that you don't know. And I think even if you do go through with an abortion, you need lots and lots of counselling because it can be a difficult decision you've made. And post-abortion counselling is so underfunded.
Do you find on conversations with your friend that they had similar experience like what we said with miscarriage, that they mourn still following the abortion? Is that what the counselling's for? Yeah.
Yes, they found that there was a study, and it was a very small study in a Liverpool abortion clinic, right? And they found that 10% of the women, they said, never had any problems having the abortion, just weren't bothered at all. 80%, it was intense pain and a loss. They had sacrificed their child, and it was brutal and it was horrible until the date of the birth. And then there was some sort of resolve. Now, the other 10% never ever recovered, right? It was something they did. So I've got another friend, and you know, they know the birthday, this child will be 42 now, etc., and all this. And they tried to investigate, and it's very difficult when it's private lives, but they actually said that the women who conceived in a violent situation, they were the ones that found that the abortion wasn't a solution. It wasn't the operation to end everything. In fact, it was a second violation of their body, which they didn't want, and caused them greater pain. So the study was trying to say that you do need therapy, you need someone to talk to, you need someone to help you and support you in your decision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of her. My sister-in-law is Heidi Luffman. She did a blog called Storm in the Tit Cup that went really famous. Hollyoaks did a storyline on her situation and stuff, and she was on Extraordinary Pregnancies, which my brother doesn't feature too much in because he felt it was a bit invasive that they just wanted to come in and just film it. But I think with Heidi, she was trying to raise awareness and stuff. But they found out they were pregnant 1 week, and then she found out she had inflammatory breast cancer the week after. And effectively, they gave her the option to either have an abortion or to carry on. And they said, we can't do the chemo that you need until you've had the baby. We can give you very light sort of care. I'm not too sure of the exact drugs or whatnot they gave her, but they said stuff that won't affect the baby. And they said at 6 months, we can have a, where they take the baby out?
Section.
Sorry, yeah, don't know why that evaded me. And they did at 6 months. And effectively what transpired was the baby was healthy, she was small, but unbeknownst to them, there was a virus in the clinic. Like, I don't know if it was MRSA or whatnot, and that's a couple of weeks later, the baby had a blood clot and died. And it was nothing to do with having been born early. It was to do with the conditions in the neonatal. A couple of other children had died of the same thing. What surprised me was, obviously, she mourns that, and little Ali, you know, it's a big topic on her blog. Now, while she's mourning that, obviously, you've got these right-wing militant style sort of people on the internet, because she's gone public and she does stuff, and they did a thing on Hollyoaks. I mean, keep in mind, she's down as terminal at the minute, which is because the cancer's moved into the blood. She's still beating the prognosis they gave her, and hopefully it does, because obviously there's different treatments every day. I mean, she's a year or two older than me, and she still gets on the internet crazy, wacky, white right-wingers. You should have just died and had the baby, let the baby live. And she did exactly that. You know, she was classed as terminal following that because of delaying her own treatments. And she still has these people who still find in your hour of need and your hour of pain the ability to then force their opinion on you. And I think, you know, there are a lot of points I wanted to cover on this, but I think we're getting about an hour in now. And just out of the purposes of having people watch this, people don't tend to watch anything over an hour. I think my conclusion is, there's a few things I wanted to say, but people will go out of their way to do things for their children. People will need to consider their situations, but there will always be people with an opinion. And I think the main conclusion I draw is there needs to be more of a support system in place. You need to eradicate the reason for abortion, not the ability to have it. And I think that's the main conclusion I sort of drew from the whole thing. If you can put a support system, when I looked at the statistics, haven't got the money, well, that needs to be something addressed by society. People need to have a better quality of life. There's issues with abuse in the home. There needs to be better support networks out there for people who suffer abuse. People don't feel that they can go to anyone for help, or they're locked in situations where there's, you know, not a support network, maybe by the police. I know the police is, I hate putting anything on the police, because if you look at the police now, they try and do anything and they're filmed. And they get edited the videos, and they're put in a position where they can't do nothing because they've gone viral. And then there's, you know, it's a hard gig being a police officer or a support worker or anyone in the age of these new mobile phones where you can be filmed. You know, there's the positive of it. You can catch the person out, like, you know, Shalvin, who was on George Floyd's neck. But then there's, for that one video, there's a million out there that are just pushing an agenda. And I feel like the main sort of conclusion for me is there needs to be a support network for each one of the reasons people are getting abortions. I know there's some scientific issues where, you know, there's risk to the mother or risk to the child. I think that's always going to be the place. And I think what we should push for is to make those the only two options left. The things that science can't catch up with yet should be the only reasons why abortion should exist. But I think it's more of a failing on us and our governments that we're not dealing with the reasons why other people are going out to get abortions. That's my conclusion. And what do you think of that? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Well, I think, again, it's definitely women and raising children. It needs to be higher in the agenda in society and making money. You know, the well-being of the next generation is so important. So I would say definitely more funding so that women aren't forced into this really difficult situation. Also got to bear in mind that giving birth is life-threatening. It's not like having a tooth out. And again,
I've been there twice. It was hard watching.
It's women are going through this, and one feminist wrote that if men had to give birth, abortion would be a sacrament, which I thought was an interesting one. That, and if you, I mean, Judith Thompson did the one about the violinist. If you woke up tomorrow morning and you were wired up to a famous violinist, and they said, look, if you get out of bed, that violinist will die, right? You've got to stay there for 9 months and put your whole life on the line. Would you do it? Right? That's how some women who do not choose to get pregnant, but get pregnant through rape and abuse, they're in that situation. Their life is on hold for someone else. Now, I don't see a lot of men stepping up to be that compassionate, but they are happy to troll on the internet and wave their banners and shout abuse. Perhaps that's part of some people's DNA, is just to support arguments where they can impose it on others. But I think the abortion, I would say that, I mean, I've adopted, and it's been a sheer pleasure, an absolute joy. So I'm so glad that I adopted. But at the same time, women are in a really difficult position, and I think actual laws and restrictions on them when they're suffering isn't the way forward. It is just more and more support. You could gradually remove abortion through by providing alternatives, and I would rather go down that route.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to try and cut you off before, because I felt like I concluded and then I tried to jump in during you. Sorry, I apologise. When you said, sorry, I'm trying to remember the point now. So, with men pointing the finger and judging, I do feel like I can't help it. It's a natural instinct. I say my peace of mind, sometimes without thinking, sometimes we haven't considered it. Sometimes it's just because, you know, I see something and I tell it as it is. And that's not something I'll ever apologise for. I feel like that, you know, people should do, as long as you're able to hold your hands up and say, maybe I was wrong, if someone can put evidence forward. But I feel like people shouldn't be pointing at people and saying, you shouldn't have an abortion. They should be saying, why are you having an abortion? Okay, well, that's something we need to address. And I think no one ever really looks at the arguments in that situation. I mean, in terms of the funding, what you were saying, I mean, what would be the process to change that in the country? I mean, people say, you see, people are out protesting saying we have pro-choice. They're not saying, well, we need to sort this, that, and the other out to stop this from happening. Because being pro-choice is fine, but there should never be the situation where you should be wanting to make that choice. Having children should be something that you should enjoy and go through in a good process. I know it doesn't always happen when you want it to happen, but you should always feel like you're in a position that if that does come along, because people can always go on about contraception. When I was looking at the studies, 50% who were in that situation said they were using contraception. So, you know,
but they could have been using it badly, and perhaps that needs greater education.
Yeah,
you know, you say, "Oh, there's a condom." Everyone can put a condom on.
You know, where you say greater education, I remember the girl that we had, the old woman that we had come into our school, and the only thing I remember from that sex education was she used the F word. She came in and she went, "Fuck." That's a word we use every day. And everyone giggled because an old woman said fuck. I don't remember a word that she said.
No, she was appalling. I argued for sex education all through my time at that school, right? And hit brick wall after brick wall, right? So when we did get people in, they were atrocious. So it was like a fail as well, you know, and it was so sad, because there are really decent teachers out there, workshops, you know, we could have really promoted it in a healthy, sensible way. But the person in charge of it, she said to me, "Well, David," she said, "the trouble is your daughter and my daughter won't think about sex till they're 25, and all the rest are just scrubbers."
What? Oh.
And I was like, oh my God, I just thought, what am I dealing with? I think also you've got to realise that there are a lot of people, because abortion is related to sex, have another agenda going on as well about what they think about sex and sexual behaviour and freedom and choices and everything, and they're channeling that through the abortion debate.
Yeah,
you know,
me and Roxanne, I mean, I don't watch it, but for the sake of hitting a wider audience and trending and stuff, the biggest abomination of a show ever, Love Island. We do like a little 3-minute thing and we do a reaction to it. And our language isn't great. Obviously, my language is a bit better now because I'm not having a drink and freely talking. I'm trying to be a good boy. But when you watch that, that's the sex education that a lot of kids get. And you're watching an hour's worth of people just acting like they're on a holiday in Magaluf. And, you know, it's comical. When we're watching it and we're reacting to it, we're actually laughing, saying that's actually quite cringy that you do that with your mates. And, you know, one of the things was they were pulling things out of a hat, out of a box, and saying, do a sexy dance with your girlfriend while the others sit and cheer. And it's just like grinding and stuff going on. And it's like, this is 9 o'clock entertainment for the 16-year-olds plus, even younger, because you'll see 13, 14-year-olds watching it. And it's like, wow, you know, this is the message that we're giving out, which, you know, it's good to be free and embrace your sexuality. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not an old fridge. But at the same time, you're aiming it at that audience, and then they're going on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, just taking all that in. And then on the other end, you've got someone in school who's like trying to put a condom on a cucumber, and that's the limit of the education they're getting there. So we were saying about support network and funding, there is nothing really out there. There's nothing.
I think
messages.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think also with Love Island, it's who becomes a star, who earns more money. It's just capitalism.
Yeah.
In bikini, that's all it is. And the attraction is it Steinbeck said, we're not the poor unemployed. We just think we're unemployed billionaires. That it'll be our moment next in the sun. And I think when you've got a society that says if you're rich, you can be secure and happy, that's the problem. Love Island is an example of that. You know, I do think a lot more decent quality education for health and everything would be really good. You know, I'm just thinking if I had anything else I wanted to say. And also, sadly, I think Call the Midwife has done this really well because it's set in the 60s. Pardon?
I never watched it.
Right. Well, it's set in the 60s. So they've been dealing with, and they're just about to legalize abortion in 1967. So the show at the moment is in 66, and they're dealing with women who've gone to backstreet abortions. So you're always going to have, even if you ban it, right? Sadly, people are going to always provide an alternative, and then most of the women die through backstreet abortions.
On that vein, it doesn't have to be the 60s, where you were talking about countries that are war-torn, etc. Ross Kemp did one that was, I think it was the Congo, and he was dealing with a lot of the rape and stuff, and people had had their limbs removed when they were held down and stuff. And one woman, I don't know if it was the same show, because he did a couple in Africa, she'd gone to the hospital and died because she tried to abort her own child she'd gone to a witch doctor who'd given her nettles to insert, and there was infection, and the baby had passed. She'd done it herself on the advice of a witch doctor, and then she'd gone and had the abortion, and then she walked out as if nothing had happened. And again, you know, I don't know what's happened with that woman. She's being filmed. She might want to show any emotion, or if it's just a culture that's not had an education as such, or it's just different. I don't know how to explain it, but you could even see Ross Kemp's face, and I think to a degree he gets a bit of stick, but he's actually quite sincere sometimes. It was just a look of shock, an absolute sort of, this isn't something that should happen, you know. And again, we're talking about funding in our country to try and stop that from happening. I mean, to go.
Then you had, I think he did one of gangs in London, and there was a girl, she was 13 or 14. She had 40 clients a day, right? And she'd had an abortion that morning. And that's in London. And when you ask about the police budget to stop human trafficking from young girls being brought into this country, especially for popular football events, etc., right? They've got such a limited budget. But track and trace, we've got 37 billion, but you want to stop these vulnerable girls who probably don't get a choice on whether they have an abortion or not. That's happening in London.
Yeah,
it's really cheerful thing to end on, isn't it?
But I was going to say, when I looked at the statistics, 5% had put down that they were having an abortion because of family and friends' influence. And like you said, that's one thing to consider in terms of some people don't get over, you know, like it was 10% that don't get over it, 80% that feel like they've had a dramatic loss. I think that was similar to your wedding. And you're putting someone in that position there's 5% of you out there that are forcing that fear. You know, they've got 10% not feeling that for the rest of their life. 10% sort of possibility that they won't be affected in that way, according to the stats. So maybe one thing to end on. I feel like that we tried to address everything anyway. There are points there that maybe I missed, but again, in order for people to watch it and take it in, we've got to really keep it in that hour mark, Dave. So, yeah, I felt like I'm not 18 anymore. I had an actual conversation without you.
You were good. You were very good.
Yeah, you used to pull this face of head in hands every time I said something when I was so.
Well, I haven't done that. I haven't done that.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm more tolerant.
Perhaps there isn't a struggle with educating me anymore. Maybe that's the conclusion. Maybe I'm making a bit more sense in my old age, like. But yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on. I'll put it out. It'll probably be later tonight or tomorrow. Make sure you share it, because the more people to see it, it's important. Not just for subscriptions and that. I feel like that maybe we made some sense. We'll find out when people comment and say, two fellas who don't know what it's like to have a baby. But yeah, you know, we appreciate that fact and we're aware of it. So
I also think that I've had lads say before, abortion's got nothing to do with lads, and I actually think it has got a lot to do, because it provide the support network as well. So,
yeah, and I just feel like if I was put in this situation, I mean, I know obviously my situation's not a bad one, but I would never want to have to go through it. So, you know, they are an important part of it, whether you think so or not. But yeah, make sure you drop some comments, give us your thoughts, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. And you never know, if he gets over this one, he might want to do it again some point. He's not.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. No worries. Well, I'll have a think of a topic. I'll let you choose the next one.
Right, okay.
Okay.
I'll think of it. All right, and great talking to you. And it's lovely to know that your students grow up into fine men.
Yeah, bald ones as well. I'm pissed off that he's still got grey hair and he's about 20 years older and I'm bald.
I'm only 5 years older.
Yeah, square root of 5. Right. Enjoy your day.
All right, then. Okay, bye.